Welcome to Ask a Construction Health and Safety Expert with Deb Moskal and Dave Dametto. I'm your host, Ken Rayner. This 5-part series is designed to give new Ontario construction businesses the essential health and safety information they need to keep workers healthy and safe and their business compliant. Each year, IHSA welcomes around 10,000 new construction firms through automatic membership when they register with WSIB. That membership gives you and your new construction business access to low or no cost training, tools, and expert guidance. And this series is part of that support. Many of the questions we will cover have come directly from Ontario construction businesses under 5 employees, companies just like yours. Today's episode, we're tackling one of the most critical topics for any new construction firm: being prepared when things go wrong. Deb and Dave, I'm grateful to once again leverage your more than 50 years of combined experience in Ontario construction health and safety to help navigate this serious subject. Okay, let's start off like we normally do with either definitions or exactly what's embedded in legislation. So Deb and Dave, what does Ontario occupational health and safety legislation state about the need for workplaces to have emergency plans in response to something terrible happening?
Yeah, Ken, our different regulations, like our industrial regulations, the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, and our construction regulations all have requirements for emergency preparedness. Our Occupational Health and Safety Act will speak to it as well. Under emergency preparedness, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, talks about an employer taking every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of the worker. And this could include implementing emergency procedures. Employers are required to prepare for various types of emergencies that could be included in their workplace, including fires, chemical spills, or other hazards relevant to the work that they're doing. Under Regulation 851, our industrial regulations, it requires an employer to develop and implement an emergency response plan. The plan should include or should address potential emergencies, provide training to workers, as well as ensuring that appropriate resources are available. Our construction regulations requires a constructor to establish written procedures that need to be followed in the event of an emergency and shall ensure that those procedures are followed on site. The constructor shall review the emergency procedures with the health and safety representative or joint health and safety committee, if any, and the constructor shall ensure that those procedures are posted in a conspicuous place on our projects. Our first aid regulation, Regulation 1101, spells out the requirement for the employer to ensure that they have properly trained first aid attendants. They have supplies in their first aid kits that meet the requirements of our regulations. The number of workers on their project or the number of workers at their office are going to determine what supplies are needed.
Yeah, and I think some other considerations worth mentioning, and we've talked about this a little, actually not a little bit, a lot in episode 2, is the completion of hazard assessments. So there's an important link here between that episode and this episode, in that completing the hazard assessment process allows us to identify the risks that the workers are exposed to, what types of emergency situations can unfold, and then if, as a result of the scope of work, we need some task-specific emergency response plans in place, such as working at heights as an example. One of the things that's important when we consider emergency response plans is we want to make sure that workers are trained in the plan. So part of this includes communicating with them, making sure the expectations are clearly laid out, that the different workplace parties understand their roles and responsibilities as it relates to that type of an emergency. We want to make sure that, if there's any questions, those are addressed before we're in a situation where we have to follow the plan. I think if we can, it's important that we practice the drill and make sure that we work out any kinks in the plan before an emergency situation arises, just so we can make sure everybody's on the same page. So we want to get the worker involvement Another individual that may be important to include would be the health and safety representative, if you have one, right? It's another set of eyes. It's another person who's been, educated in health and safety. And I think it's good for them to get a chance to review it and provide some input as well. I think, in thinking about our project sites that we work on and the locations that we work in, we want to make sure we have, for sure, a plan in place for emergency evacuation. So if we need to get workers off the site, make sure there's clear routes to do that, clear access points, and that workers know where they're going in the event of an evacuation. So where's that gathering area going to be? We also want to make sure we have a plan for medical emergency response. So this includes, as Dave was mentioning, the first aid supplies that are required, the trained first aid attendant, and making sure that we have the resources needed to provide assistance until a paramedic, as an example, arrives. Another item would be hazardous materials and making sure that we have a procedure for dealing with spills or accidental releases of products and substances on site.
Okay, and through all that, you talked a lot about the what, which is great. You mentioned a little bit about the who. You did mention that, hey, let's get the health and safety representative involved in this. So Dave, that's my next question for you, is really who should be required to be involved in the review of emergency procedures for a project?
Yeah, Ken, you're right. Deb already mentioned the health and safety representative or joint health and safety committee. Our construction regulation requires that to be in place. But workers themselves, we need to be able to ensure that they understand and are adequately trained in the emergency response plans that we have. But we're also going to ask maybe for their input on what work they're doing, what they think could happen, and what they think that could improve this plan that we've put into play. Workers should be informed, trained in all the emergency response plans that they may be part of. So it could be something like a fall rescue. They need to be trained in that as well. Supervisors are responsible for ensuring workers are trained to follow the emergency procedures, that they have supervisors may have specific requirements to be part of that plan, and it could include something like an evacuation. They may be responsible for ensuring that everybody's out of the building and into the proper areas, as Deb mentioned previously. Competent persons, if the project has involved specialized work like chemicals, heavy equipment, or other specialized construction work where a competent person is required, we may be asking them to be part of that. This could include your contractors or subcontractors who may be bringing hazards into your project that you're not quite aware of. So we're going to try to get their input into this emergency response plan if required. Our emergency responders, our fire department, our ambulance attendants, and our police forces, they may be required for specific emergency scenarios to be able to get workers to help when needed. Specialized consultants may be needed. You may have high-risk operations that you're going to be doing, and you may have experts that are you're able to draw upon for their expertise.
Okay. Dave and Deb, what are some examples of construction-related hazards that are associated with high-risk activities that must have a comprehensive emergency response plan just because of the nature of the work?
One of the first things we need to talk about, Ken, is falls from heights. So procedures for rescuing the worker who have fallen and being able to provide immediate medical assistance to those workers who have sustained injuries. Electrical hazards is another one where we need to have procedures in place to be able to disconnect the power to ensure that there's no further exposure to those electrical hazards. And we need to be able to administer a first aid, CPR, if required. We want to make sure that we have clear procedures, again, like disconnecting that power, being able to ensure that training is provided to those people when it comes to first aid.
Yeah, good point. And another area that we work in quite a bit within construction is excavations and trenches. We work around a lot of structures that have the potential to collapse in construction as we're erecting buildings, as an example. So we want to make sure we have plans in place for immediate rescue of those workers. That could be, including additional shoring to prevent further collapse, but we want to be able to extract workers, allow emergency responders safe and quick access to the situation. So it's just another one that we tend to be exposed to quite often. I will say the list we're providing is not by any means exhaustive, so you'll want to make sure you check the regulations. But just quickly, if I can, some other tasks that we do which require task-specific emergency response plans would be things like, working on or near water has very specific requirements. Confined space has very specific requirements. So again, just a reminder to double check the regulation for requirements.
Absolutely. And as you were painting those pictures, I'm imagining either myself as the worker who's suspended in fall arrest, the worker that has maybe been buried up to my waist or my chest in a trench collapse, and if I'm that worker, boy, am I hoping that my company has got an emergency response plan that's been well thought out and practiced. And if I'm those workers that are there witnessing the whole thing, standing around, you don't want to feel helpless. You want to know what part you play and how to enact that emergency response plan right away.
And I think that's the importance about when we talk about training and practicing these drills, is we don't want to make it so common that it's seen as another practice when in fact this is a real situation. What we're aiming to do and hoping to do when we discuss this is to alleviate some of that anxiety for both, as you said, the workers who are responding, the worker who's trapped or suspended, that we've done this before. There's still going to be an increased anxiety, but we've confirmed we're all on the same page. So if we follow what we did before, we can hopefully then expect that positive outcome.
Right. Dave, maybe we could pick one of the hazards like that we just discussed and provide some guidance, a very high-level guidance on the information or tasks that really should be included in an emergency plan.
Yeah, for sure, Ken. We can, talk about falls from heights. And again, like we said before, not exhaustive, but just some examples that you should be including. So site-specific information would have to be there. Roles and responsibilities of the different workplace parties, the rescuers, and so forth. Types of fall scenarios is going to be relevant, where they're falling from and so forth. What rescue procedures do we have in place? What rescue equipment do we need and do we have in place? Medical response, so talking about who's going to be calling 911 and so forth. Training requirements is a big one. Communication to our sites, to our workers, and to the rescue team to ensure that this happens. Documentation and review to make sure our plans are relevant, that they've been practiced, and we want to be able to make sure that if there's any flaws in those plans, we're able to look back and we're able to get that information.
Okay. Deb, what are some important considerations for developing an emergency response plan?
That's a very good question. That's a very big question. So I will, preface this answer with this is not an exhaustive list. But some of the key things I think would be make sure you have an emergency response plan in place. We talked about making sure we have a medical and evacuation plan, any task-specific emergency response plans that may be required, and the importance of communicating that very clearly to workers. I will encourage you to ask them questions on the plan, gauge their understanding, find out if they have any concerns, and encourage them to bring that forward to you. One of the things I want to absolutely stress is 911 is not an emergency response plan. 911, I'm sure you'll agree, is absolutely part of the plan, but it cannot be the plan. So we have to have a provision to provide emergency assistance to a worker in need until paramedics can take over, as an example. So you'll want to check Ontario Regulation 420/21, which outlines reporting requirements for the Ministry of Labour, because there are criteria and situations where we do have to notify the ministry and associated timelines that are expected for different types of incidents. I would say generally you're going to want to make sure you preserve the incident scene. So you don't want to disturb things, you don't want to change things, you want to leave it the way it is as much as we can. Maintain your documentation, so maintain your training records, maintain any records of maybe it's equipment inspections, site inspections, or maybe if I'm asking you, Ken, what you witnessed prior to an incident or during, those interview records, I'm going to want to maintain those as well. And then once the situation's dealt with, the emergency's been handled, the investigation's completed, I'll encourage you to go back and review your emergency response plan, identify what went well and what are some areas for improvement. Let's close the gaps on the areas of improvement and then make sure you re-communicate that plan out to the workers again and confirm understanding.
I'm really glad you mentioned that 911 is not an emergency plan, because based on where they are geographically in the province of Ontario, based on perhaps what is going on at that time with emergency services, it could be a delayed response through no one's fault. It could take 20 minutes for the emergency responders to get to that site. And in the meantime, what's being done?
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah, really good point. Dave, what are the consequences of not having an adequate emergency response plan or failing to follow one during an incident?
Well, any delay, Ken, or uncoordinated response is going to increase possibly the worker's injuries. And in some cases, could be fatal if we're not getting to that worker as quickly as we need to. Without clear procedures, workers can make them or put themselves in unsafe conditions if we don't have proper procedures in place. Time is critical, especially for incidents like falls, worker hanging from their harness, fires, chemical exposure, or electrical shock. If we're not getting to those workers as quickly as we can, the scenario is not going to end up very good.
Absolutely. Okay. Got a couple questions from some new Ontario construction firms.
Sure.
Deb, the first question is, what support is available to new construction firms to help them develop emergency response plans?
That's a good question. I think I'll start with training. So we've talked quite a bit about our basics of supervising training. In there, we do discuss the importance of emergency response plans and planning for incidents to occur. We also discuss in quite a bit of detail the requirements for reporting to the Ministry of Labour, who needs to report by when and how. I would say our communication skills for supervising health and safety would be another important consideration. In there, we get into how to conduct investigations, how to interview witnesses to incidents. I think our investigating and reporting program as well obviously contains a lot of context around the topic that's very important to know. If we take a look at our products, we have the emergency response poster, which is available on our internet site for organizations to utilize. We have our emergency response planning for construction projects document as well, another useful tool, as well as our construction health and safety manual talks about very specific hazards and can aid in planning.
Okay. Dave, I'm not sure how you get asked these questions. I think this is probably the second or third time we've asked you something about how often something needs to occur. So again, Dave, once again to you, how often should emergency drills be conducted on construction sites?
Well, we're going to look at site-specific risk, Ken. More complex or more dangerous sites are going to require more often that we're going to have to look at these emergency plans and how often we're going to have to practice them. If you've got a lot of worker turnover, where there's different workers coming onto sites, maybe it's part of the orientation that we're going to utilize to be able to get that information for them. There may be regulatory requirements that need to be followed, and we want to make sure that we're complying with those regulatory requirements. And we want to make sure that when you're doing all this, that we keep a record of documentation on who's been trained, what they've been trained on, when we practice our emergency response, what went good, what went bad. So we want to be able to look at what went bad and be able to correct those so that there is no delay in helping those workers who need help.
Dave and Deb, thank you so much for providing your expert guidance on this very serious topic. And that wraps our final session of Ask a Construction Health and Safety Expert with Deb Moskal and Dave Dametto. As I've stated at the conclusion of every one of these sessions, we are proud to support Ontario's construction industry. And we are very proud to provide you the tools and the training you need to help keep you and your workers safe and healthy and keep your businesses compliant. So on behalf of our experts, Dave and Deb, myself, and the entire Infrastructure Health and Safety Association, thank you for investing your time and attention in this series. And please visit us at IHSA.ca.